She hid the bruises under her sleeves for months, and he saw them the moment he walked in. A mafia boss who had spent his life in the business of power, and a woman who had forgotten she was allowed to take up space. This is not a story about being rescued. This is a story about the moment someone finally sees you, and what you decide to do with that. Before this ends, ask yourself, have you ever waited for someone else to give you permission to choose yourself? The sleeves were always long. Emma Richardson had made it a habit so natural, so deeply sewn into her daily routine, that she no longer noticed the deliberate way her fingers tugged at her cuffs every time she reached for something. Every morning, she dressed in the dark of her apartment bathroom, pulling the fabric down past her wrists before she could look at herself in the mirror. It wasn't vanity. It wasn't cold. It was a ritual of concealment so practiced it had become instinct. She told herself it was fine. She told herself it wasn't that bad. She told herself that most people had things they kept hidden, and that hers were just a little more literal than most. The coffee shop where she worked was called Birchwood, tucked between a dry cleaner and a law firm on the west side of Chicago. The kind of neighborhood where men in expensive suits walked quickly and never looked twice at a woman carrying a tray of cappuccinos. Emma liked that. She liked being invisible. Invisibility had kept her safe for 2 years, and she had learned to mistake safety for peace. She arrived at 6:15 every morning, 45 minutes before the shop opened, and spent the quiet pre-dawn hours setting up the display cases, calibrating the espresso machine, and arranging the small chalkboard signs in the window with a precision that her manager, Diane, called obsessive and Emma called necessary. Structure was the only thing she could control. She held onto it the way a person holds onto the side of a pool when they're not sure they know how to swim. It was a Tuesday in early March when everything changed. The morning had started the same as every other. Emma had walked the 6 blocks from her apartment with her coat zipped to her chin and her sleeves already pulled down beneath it just in case. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through the street like a blade, and she had kept her eyes low, moving fast, exhaling clouds of white into the frozen air. She had not slept well. She rarely did anymore. She had made it through the morning rush without incident, which was itself a kind of victory. The bruise on her left forearm, fading now from deep purple to a sick greenish yellow, had not been seen by anyone. Her cheekbone, which had stopped hurting after the 3rd day, showed nothing from the outside. She had learned which shades of concealer worked best under Birchwood's warm lighting, and she had become expert at angles. The exact tilt of her head, the precise positioning of her body, that kept certain things from being visible. She was pouring a refill for the man at table 4 when the door opened. She didn't look up immediately. The bell above the door rang dozens of times a day, and she had trained herself out of the automatic glance most people gave it. She finished pouring, smiled at the man at table 4, a regular named Gerald who always ordered black coffee and tipped exactly $1, and then turned back toward the counter. That was when she felt it. Not heard it. Not saw it. Felt it. A shift in the air, the way a room changes when something powerful walks into it. A heaviness that wasn't oppressive but was unmistakably present, like barometric pressure dropping before a storm. Emma's body registered it before her mind did, a low instinctive alertness that prickled along the back of her neck and made her slow her steps without understanding why. She looked toward the door. He was already at the counter. She had not heard him cross the room. That alone should have been impossible for a man his size. He was enormous, broad-shouldered and dense with muscle in the way of someone who had spent years building his body into something that communicated power before a single word was spoken. He wore a dark charcoal overcoat over a black suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt open, and the contrast between the expensive fabric and the raw, physical force of the man inside it was striking in a way Emma couldn't immediately process. His hair was dark, cut close on the sides and slightly longer on top, and his jaw was the kind of jaw that looked like it had been carved rather than grown. There were tattoos visible above his collar, climbing the side of his neck in dark geometric patterns, and his hands, resting flat on the counter, showed more ink across the knuckles. He was, objectively, the most physically arresting man Emma had ever seen in her life. He was also looking directly at her. His eyes were dark brown, almost black in the shop's warm light, and they were not the eyes of a man who was accustomed to waiting. "Good morning," Emma said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "Coffee," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, carrying the particular weight of a man who had never needed to raise it to be heard. "Black. No sugar." "Of course." She turned to the machine, grateful for the excuse to look away. Her hands moved through the familiar sequence: portafilter, tamp, lock, pull, and she focused on the sound and the routine until the strange electricity she had felt at the back of her neck began to subside. She set the cup on the counter in front of him. He didn't take it immediately. He was looking at her face with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who was accustomed to reading people, to noticing the things they tried to conceal. Emma felt the examination like a physical thing, and instinctively dropped her eyes to the counter. "Emma," said Diane, appearing from the back with a clipboard and her reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead. "Can you take the inventory sheet down to the stockroom? The delivery came in through the back." "Sure," Emma said, relieved. She picked up the clipboard and moved out from behind the counter, heading for the narrow hallway that led to the stockroom. She was 3 steps past the end of the counter when her sleeve caught on the edge of the pastry display case. It was a small thing, the kind of thing that happened a dozen times a day in a busy coffee shop. The fabric snagged on a metal corner, tugged back, and before Emma could react, the sleeve rode up past her wrist, past the fading bruise, exposing the forearm she had spent 6 months keeping covered. She yanked it down immediately. It was less than 2 seconds. 1.5, maybe. She pulled the fabric back into place and kept walking without breaking her stride, her face perfectly composed, her expression giving away nothing. But she had been standing less than 4 feet from the man at the counter, and she had seen, in the single fractured second before she looked away, that he had seen it too. She made herself stay in the stockroom for longer than the inventory required. She stood between the shelving units with the clipboard pressed flat against her chest and told herself that it was fine, that he hadn't seen anything, that even if he had, a man in an expensive coat stopping at a coffee shop on his way somewhere important was not going to give a second thought to a waitress's arm. People saw things and forgot them immediately. That was the gift of her invisibility. That was what she had built her life around. She completed the inventory slowly, moving her pen down each row with deliberate care, and by the time she returned to the front of the shop, she had her face arranged and her breathing controlled, and her sleeves precisely where she needed them to be. He was still there. He had taken a seat at the small table nearest the window, the one with the view of the street, and he was not looking at his phone the way everyone else did when they sat alone. He was looking out the window with his cup between his hands, his expression unreadable, the line of his shoulders communicating a stillness that didn't feel like relaxation. It felt like patience. The specific, deliberate patience of a man who was waiting for something he had already decided he was going to get. Emma went back behind the counter and did not look at him again. She almost succeeded. He was there for 40 minutes. He did not order anything else. He did not open a laptop or take a phone call or read. He simply sat and drank his coffee, and occasionally looked out at the street with that same quality of attention that made Emma feel, irrationally, like she was the street. When he finally rose to leave, he came back to the counter. He placed a folded bill on the surface. Emma glanced at it, $100 for a $3 coffee, and looked up at him instinctively. His eyes moved to her left arm, not her face, her arm, deliberate, direct, an acknowledgement rather than an accident. "Keep the change," he said, and then he left. Emma stood completely still for a moment after the door closed. Then she picked up the bill and tucked it into the register and told herself it meant nothing, that people tipped strangely all the time, that the look had been coincidence or sympathy, or any of a dozen things that were not what her body was telling her it was. She pulled her sleeve down one more time and went back to work. He came back the next morning, and the one after that. By the fourth day, Emma had stopped pretending she wasn't watching for him. She catalogued everything she observed about him with the careful, involuntary attention she gave to things that unsettled her, the way he moved through the room as though it had been rearranged for him, the way other people unconsciously gave him space without seeming to realize they were doing it, the way the two men who occasionally accompanied him, different men, each time, but always bearing the same quality of watchful stillness, stationed themselves near the door rather than joining him at his table. She did not know who he was. She knew only that his name, when he finally offered it on the fifth morning in response to her asking for a name on his order, was Caleb. He did not offer a last name. She did not ask. What she knew about him she had assembled from observation alone. He was a man other men were afraid of. He was a man who wore his danger the way most people wore cologne. Present, unmistakable, but not threatening unless you got close enough to breathe it in. He was a man who tipped $100 for black coffee and spent 40 minutes sitting at a window table watching the street as though the street owed him something. And he was a man who, every single morning, without drawing attention to it, positioned himself at the counter at exactly the angle that gave him the clearest view of her left arm. She noticed that on day 6. On day 7, she was carrying a tray of ceramic cups from the back when one of them shifted and she grabbed for it with her right hand, the sudden movement pulling her sleeve back. She caught the cup. She steadied the tray. She looked up and found him already looking at her wrist. Not with pity. She would have hated pity. With something harder than that. Something that looked, improbably, like anger. Not at her. Something that looked like fury aimed at whoever had put those marks there in the first place. Emma set the tray down and straightened and met his gaze across the room with the careful, composed expression she had spent years perfecting. He held her eyes for a long moment. Then he looked back out the window, and she went back to work, and neither of them said a word. But something had shifted between them in the silence. Something had been said without language, acknowledged without acknowledgement, and Emma drove home that night feeling, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like someone had actually seen her. Not what she was hiding. Her. She wasn't sure which frightened her more. His full name was Caleb Santoro. She learned this not from him but from a conversation she was not meant to overhear. She had been restocking the shelves beside the service counter when 2 men came in, not his usual associates, but strangers, visibly nervous in the way that men who are usually powerful become nervous when they are out of their element. And one of them leaned toward the other and said under his breath, "If Santoro finds out we came here without—" The other man cut him off with a sharp look, and both of them glanced toward the window table where Caleb sat with his back to them. They left without ordering. Emma processed the name slowly over the next hour, the way she processed everything that frightened her, methodically, carefully, at a deliberate distance. Santoro. She had lived in Chicago long enough to know the name the way people knew storm warning colors, as a signal to pay attention, to move carefully, to understand that the atmosphere had changed. The Santoro family had been a fixture of Chicago's underworld for 3 generations. She knew this the way most people knew it, through news stories that were careful and vague, through the particular silence that fell over certain neighborhoods when certain names were spoken, through the specific quality of deference she had seen police officers give to men she later realized she should have recognized. She stood behind the counter and thought about this for a long time. And then she thought about the $100 bills, the careful positioning, the way he looked at her arm, not with the prurient curiosity of someone who had caught a glimpse of something private, but with the focused attention of someone who was making a record. She thought about the anger she had seen in his eyes that wasn't aimed at her. She thought about the fact that in 7 days of observing him, she had never once felt afraid of him in the way she felt afraid of other things. That was strange. She was a woman who had learned fear the way most people learned a second language, through immersion, through necessity, through the discovery that her survival depended on fluency. She knew the grammar of danger. She knew its conjugations. She had become expert at reading the specific, particular fear of a man whose temper was close to the surface, the shift in posture, the tightening at the jaw, the way a room went very still just before something broke. Caleb Santoro did not produce that feeling in her. He produced something else entirely. Something she had no vocabulary for, which frightened her in its own way. She finished the afternoon shift. She walked home in the dark. She tugged her sleeves down past her wrists in the cold March wind and told herself that none of it mattered. That rich and powerful and dangerous men did not concern themselves with coffee shop waitresses. That whatever she thought she had seen in his expression had been a projection of her own desperate need to believe that someone, somewhere, might see what she was enduring and decide that it was unacceptable. She was still telling herself this when she unlocked her apartment door and found the note. It was tucked under the doormat with the precision of someone who did not want it to be missed. A single sheet of heavy cream paper, folded once, no envelope, no name on the outside. She stood in her dark hallway for a long time before she picked it up. Inside, in handwriting that was spare and deliberate, and oddly elegant for a man who wore violence in his eyes. You don't have to keep hiding. And beneath it, a phone number. Nothing else. Emma stood in the hallway with the note in her hands for a very long time. Her first instinct was fear. Pure, reflexive, animal fear. The kind that didn't ask questions and didn't need reasons. Someone had found her address. Someone had been to her building. Someone knew where she lived. But the fear had a different texture than the kind she was used to. The kind she was used to came from inside the apartment. This was different. She read the note again. She thought about his eyes and the anger that wasn't aimed at her. She folded the paper carefully and placed it in the inside pocket of her coat. She didn't call the number, but she didn't throw it away either. 2 weeks passed. She still did not call. What she did instead was continue to exist in the careful, contracted way she had been existing for 2 years. Going to work, coming home, keeping her sleeves long and her eyes down and her world small enough that there were fewer edges to cut herself on. She was, she knew, a woman who had traded her life for the illusion of safety. And she had been doing it for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to want more than the absence of pain. The note stayed in her coat pocket. She was aware of it constantly, a small, dense weight that she touched sometimes, unconsciously, when she walked. Caleb continued to come to Birchwood every morning. Their interactions remained what they had always been. Brief, contained, conducted almost entirely in the language of things left unsaid. She brought his coffee. He left his $100 bill. Occasionally their eyes met across the counter, and she felt that same strange pressure of being fully seen, and each time she looked away first. She was not ready. She didn't know what she wasn't ready for, exactly, only that the paper in her pocket represented a door she wasn't sure she had the courage to open. It was a Thursday morning, the last Thursday of March, when Daniel came into the shop. She heard his voice before she saw him. Low, carefully pleasant in the way that things are pleasant when an audience is present. And she turned from the espresso machine to find him standing at the end of the counter in his gray work jacket, smiling the smile he used for strangers. "There she is," Daniel said. His eyes moved over her with the proprietary attention she had learned to dread. "I figured I'd swing by. Say hi." "Hi," Emma said. Her voice was perfect, completely level. Years of practice. "You look tired," he said it pleasantly. Concern stitched into the surface. "Busy morning," she said. "You should take better care of yourself." He reached out and adjusted the collar of her shirt. The gesture intimate and possessive, in a way she felt rather than saw, and she held herself perfectly still. "I will," she said. He smiled. "I'll see you tonight." He left. Emma turned back to the espresso machine and spent several seconds performing the simple task of breathing. The shop had other customers. The morning was continuing. She was fine. She was perfectly fine. She reached for the portafilter, and someone's hand closed around her wrist. Not violently. Not with any of the characteristics she associated with hands closing around her wrists. This grip was firm and careful, and utterly unlike anything she had experienced before, and when she looked up, Caleb Santoro was standing behind the counter, which was not allowed, which no one did, which Diane would have had something very specific to say about, looking down at her with those dark, steady eyes. She had not heard him move. She had not heard him stand. She had not heard anything. He had simply appeared beside her with the same quality of silent, inevitable presence she had noticed on the very first morning. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her wrist, where his hand had stopped the tugging at the sleeve before she'd even realized she was doing it. His thumb was resting just below the edge of the fabric, not pulling it back, not exposing anything, just resting there, with a gentleness entirely at odds with the size of his hand and the ink on his knuckles and the reputation attached to his name. "Emma," he said. It was the first time he had used her name. She looked up at him. "You're not going to keep doing this," he said. It was not a question. It was not a demand. It was something she had no exact category for. A statement delivered with absolute certainty, but without any of the force or threat or implied consequence that usually accompanied certainty in her experience. It was the voice of a man who had decided something and was informing her of it as a courtesy. She wanted to say she didn't know what he meant. She wanted to perform her usual composure, to arrange her expression into the careful blankness she had perfected. She wanted to say she was fine, that it was nothing, that she had things handled. She said none of these things. Because he was looking at her with that anger again, the anger that wasn't aimed at her. And for the first time in 2 years, she felt something inside her chest begin, slowly and painfully, to crack. "You don't know anything about this," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know enough," he said. He released her wrist with the same careful gentleness with which he had taken it. He stepped back out from behind the counter. He returned to his table. He didn't look at her again for the rest of the morning, but when he left, there was no $100 bill. There was a business card, placed face down on the table. She waited until he was gone before she picked it up. On the back, in that same sparse, deliberate handwriting, "When you're ready." Emma stood in the middle of Birchwood Coffee with the card in her hand, and the March light coming through the window, and the weight of the last 2 years pressing down on her chest, like something she had been carrying so long. She had forgotten it had a name. She was 27 years old. She had not chosen the wrong man knowingly. She had chosen him the way most people chose things that hurt them. Slowly, without realizing, one small capitulation at a time, until one day she had looked around and discovered she was somewhere she had never meant to be. She placed the card in her pocket next to the note. And for the first time in a very long time, she let herself think about what it might mean. Not just to be seen, but to be seen by someone dangerous enough that being under his protection meant something real. The thought terrified her. But it was the first thing that had made her feel anything other than afraid in longer than she could remember. And she held on to that, carefully, the way you hold on to something you've only just realized you've been missing. She called the number on a Sunday. She had not planned to. She had spent 11 days carrying the business card in her coat pocket alongside the original note, and she had told herself, each of those 11 days, that she was not going to call, that it was reckless, that getting involved with a man like Caleb Santoro was trading one kind of danger for another, that she was an adult woman with agency and self-preservation instincts, and the last thing she needed was to hand herself to someone powerful, simply because powerful felt safer than what she already had. She called on a Sunday because Sunday was the day Daniel went to see his brother in Evanston, which meant she had 6 hours in her apartment without him, and 6 hours was enough time to think clearly for the first time all week. She sat at her kitchen table with a mug of coffee that went cold while she looked at the card, and somewhere around the second hour of sitting there, she stopped arguing with herself and picked up her phone. It rang twice. Emma. He picked up on the second ring and said her name immediately, without waiting for her to speak, which should have unsettled her, and instead made her chest do something complicated. "You knew it was me," she said. "I had the number ready," he said simply. She didn't ask what that meant. She understood what it meant, and understanding it opened a new and unfamiliar feeling in her chest that was not entirely fear. "I don't know why I'm calling," she said. "Yes, you do," he said. There was a silence. Outside her window, the city was doing its Sunday morning things. Distant sirens, the bass of a passing car, the specific urban quiet of a morning when most people were still in bed. Emma looked at the coffee ring her mug had left on the table. "He doesn't know I have this number," she said. "Good," Caleb said. And the word was quiet and absolute, and carried within it something she couldn't quite name. Not a threat, not a promise, but something that existed in the space between the two. "I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. This isn't me asking you to do anything. She stopped. Started again. "I haven't talked to anyone about this. Not anyone. And I thought..." She stopped again. "I know," he said. "You don't know anything about me. I know you've been covering your left forearm since the first morning I came in," he said. "I know the concealer on your jaw was slightly thicker on the 3rd week of February than it was before or after. I know you flinch when someone moves fast near you. I know you got very still when that man walked into the shop on Thursday, and that you held yourself together with everything you had until he left." A pause. "I know you're sitting in your apartment alone right now because Sunday is the day you have to yourself." Emma sat very still. "That last part is either reassuring or deeply alarming," she said, and her voice came out almost steady. Something shifted in his tone. Not warmth, exactly, but something adjacent to it. "It's neither. It's just paying attention." "Why?" she said. The question sat between them. "Because you deserve someone paying attention," he said, "and because no one has been." Emma pressed her fingers flat against the table and breathed and told herself she was not going to cry on the phone with Caleb Santoro at 10 in the morning on a Sunday. She was absolutely not going to do that. "I'm not in a position to..." she started. "I'm not asking you to be in any position," he said. "I'm asking you to meet me for coffee, not at Birchwood, somewhere he doesn't know about." "And then what?" "And then you drink coffee and you talk or you don't talk and you go home. That's it." She looked at the business card on the table, at the spare, deliberate handwriting on the back. "When you're ready." "This is a bad idea," she said. "Probably," he agreed. She almost laughed. It was such an unexpected thing, the honesty of it, the refusal to perform reassurance, that it broke something open in her chest in a way she hadn't been prepared for. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They agreed on a place. A small Italian cafe 3 neighborhoods over, the kind of place with no windows facing the street and a back corner table that wasn't visible from the door. He gave her the address without her asking how he knew it, and she didn't ask. She went home and changed her clothes 3 times and told herself she was not doing that. She went anyway. He was already there when she arrived. He was at the back corner table, exactly as she'd expected, and he had positioned his chair with his back to the wall and a clear sight line to the door, which she noticed and filed away as something she would think about later. He was wearing dark jeans and a black sweater. No coat. And without the armor of the expensive overcoat, he looked both more accessible and somehow more dangerous. She could see the way the fabric pulled across his shoulders, the suggestion of ink at his forearms below the pushed-up sleeves, the specific physical density of a man who had built himself into something formidable. He stood when she approached the table. That surprised her. It shouldn't have. It was a simple thing, a basic courtesy. But she had not been treated with simple courtesies in long enough that the gesture landed somewhere undefended, and she had to work to keep her expression from showing it. "You came," he said. "You seemed surprised," she said. "I wasn't sure," he said honestly. She sat down across from him. A server appeared and she ordered an Americano, and Caleb ordered nothing new. There was already a cup on his side of the table, barely touched. He had been here a while, waiting to see if she would come. For a few minutes they simply sat. Emma looked at her hands on the table, and then at the room, and then, finally, at him. "How do you know so much about my schedule?" she said. It was the question she'd been turning over since the phone call. He looked at her levelly. "I had someone look into it. After the first week. That's—" She searched for the right word. "Invasive," he said. "I know. I'm not going to pretend it isn't." He held her gaze. "I needed to know if you were in immediate danger. I needed to know how often he was in the building. You could have just asked me. You wouldn't have told me the truth, not then." She thought about that. He was right. And the fact that he was right and knew he was right without making it a weapon was something she didn't quite know how to categorize. "And now?" she said. "Now you called me," he said. "So now I'm asking." The server brought her coffee. Emma wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at the steam rising from it and thought about what it meant to tell the truth to a stranger. Thought about what it meant to tell the truth to anyone, after 2 years of performing fine. "His name is Daniel Marsh," she said. Her voice was completely flat. "We've been together for 2 years and 3 months. It started when I was 25, and I was coming out of a bad year, and he seemed stable, calm. He has a job, a normal apartment. He introduces himself to people at parties and asks them about themselves." She paused. "He's very good at seeming normal." Caleb said nothing. He was watching her the way he watched everything, with total, undivided attention, without rushing her toward any particular destination. "It was small things first," she said. "That's what everyone says, isn't it? But it's true. It starts with the way he says your name when you've done something that inconvenienced him. Just your name, nothing else. Just a slight—" She paused. Just a slight emphasis, a slight lowering of his voice. "And you know you're in trouble, but you don't know why. And you spend the rest of the evening trying to figure out what you did wrong." She stopped. "I spent 1.5 years trying to figure out what I did wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong," Caleb said. His voice was very quiet. "I know that now," she said. "I don't feel it yet, but I know it." She told him the rest of it, in the same quiet, flat voice, the way you tell things that you have rehearsed in your own head many times but never spoken aloud. She told him about the first time, which had been a shove rather than a hit, and how she had told herself it was an accident, a moment of frustration, something that would never happen again. She told him about how wrong she had been. She told him about the specific, practiced way he had of making her feel that everything was her fault, that his anger was her responsibility, that leaving was not a viable option because she had nowhere to go and no one who would believe her, and a version of the story that would follow her. She told him about the sleeves. When she finished, the cafe was quieter than it had been, and her coffee was mostly gone. And she felt strangely lighter, the way you feel after you have been carrying something heavy for so long that you've forgotten the weight until the moment it's briefly lifted. Caleb had not moved, had not interrupted, had not offered sympathy in the practiced, uncomfortable way that made you feel like a problem to be managed. He had simply listened with the same quality of total attention that she had been cataloging in him for weeks, and when she finished, he looked at her for a moment before he spoke. "Do you want to leave him?" he said. "Yes," she said, without hesitation. It came out of her before she could think about it, and hearing it in her own voice, definitive, unambiguous, startled her with its own clarity. "Are you afraid of what happens if you do?" "Yes," she said, again immediately. He nodded, not in the way of someone dismissing her fear, but in the way of someone taking an accurate measurement. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. "I'm going to help you," he said. "You're not going to be in that apartment much longer." Something inside her went very still. "I don't need you to... I'm not asking for... Emma," he said. Just her name, the same way he had said it on the phone, with a certainty that was not commanding, but was also not negotiable. "You're not alone in this anymore. That's not a threat, and it's not a condition. It's just the truth." She looked at him across the small table in the small cafe, with the steam from her finished coffee dissipating between them, and she thought about the note under the doormat. "You don't have to keep hiding." She thought about the 2 years of performing fine. She thought about what it felt like to say yes to someone and mean it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You don't know me." He considered the question seriously, the way he did everything. "Because I walked into a coffee shop 8 weeks ago, and I saw a woman covering something she should never have had to cover," he said. "And because I have spent my entire life in the business of power, and I know what it looks like when someone is being suffocated by someone else's." He paused. "And because," he said more quietly, "I have done things in my life that I can't undo. But I can decide what I do from here." Emma held that for a moment. "You're not a good person," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an attempt at honesty. "No," he said, "but you're not going to hurt me." He looked at her steadily. "No," he said, "I'm not." She believed him. She had no rational basis for believing him. She had every rational basis for disbelieving him, and yet the belief sat in her chest with the solidity of something that had been there a long time, waiting to be confirmed. "I need to go back tonight," she said. "I can't just... I need time to figure out..." "I know," he said. "Go back tonight. But tell me when he leaves in the morning." She looked at him. "And then we start," he said. She texted him the next morning at 7:42, which was 2 minutes after Daniel's car left the parking structure. The text was a single word: gone. His response came in under a minute: "I know." She stood in her kitchen with her phone in her hand and thought about what it meant that he already knew, and found that the thought didn't frighten her. What happened over the following 10 days was methodical and careful in the way that only someone with significant resources and significant experience could make it. She was not consulted on every detail. There were things Caleb arranged that she learned about only when they were complete. But she was consulted on the things that mattered: where she wanted to go, what she needed to take. Whether there was anyone who needed to know where she was, there was no one. That was the thing she had said to him in the cafe that had cost her the most. There is no one. No family close enough to call. No friends he hadn't gradually, skillfully isolated her from over 2 years. She had not framed it as a confession. She had said it in her flat, factual voice. But he had heard it, and his jaw had done something she recognized now as the anger he kept very carefully controlled, and he had not said anything for a long moment. The apartment was found on a Tuesday. She had not picked it. She had been told the address and the floor, and the fact that it was paid for the first 6 months, and she had started to protest, and he had looked at her with those dark, steady eyes, and said, "It is not a transaction," and she had believed him. She moved on a Thursday, in the middle of the day, while Daniel was at work. 2 of Caleb's people helped her carry boxes. They were efficient and quiet, and treated her with a careful, impersonal courtesy that she understood and appreciated. When it was done, she stood in an empty apartment that was hers, genuinely hers, with no one else's name attached to it, and felt something she did not immediately recognize. It took her several minutes to identify it as safety. Not the performance of safety. Not the careful, contracted version she had been living for 2 years. Real safety. The kind that didn't require her to monitor the temperature of another person's silence. She called Caleb. "I'm in," she said. "Good," he said. "Thank you," she said. There was a brief pause. "You did the hard part," he said. She almost argued with that. Then she thought about what the hard part had actually been. Not the moving, not the logistics, but the 2 years before, the morning she had decided to call, the moment at the table when she had said yes without hesitation and heard herself mean it. And she thought maybe he was right. "I don't know what this is," she said, meaning them, meaning the strange, weighted, careful thing between them that had been building since the first morning in the coffee shop. "I don't know what you want from this." "I know," he said. "You don't have to know yet." "But eventually," she said. "Eventually," he agreed. She stood in her empty apartment with the afternoon light coming through windows that she had chosen, in a building where Daniel's name was on no lease and no buzzer, and she felt, for the first time in 2 years, like a person who existed in full, rather than in part. She did not see Caleb in person for 5 days after the move. She had half expected him to appear. He was, she had gathered, a man who appeared when he chose to, in places he chose to be. And the absence was both a relief and something she found herself more aware of than she wanted to admit. She went back to Birchwood. She worked her shifts. She walked home to her new apartment in the early spring dark and unlocked the door without bracing herself, and every time she did, she had to sit with the profound strangeness of what it felt like to open a door without fear. Daniel had called her 14 times in the first 2 days. She had not answered. On the 3rd day, the calls stopped. She didn't know what that meant yet, and she didn't let herself think about it too carefully. She was finishing the closing shift on a Friday, the last customer gone, the machines cleaned, the chairs stacked, when she heard the door. She turned. Caleb was standing in the entrance of the empty coffee shop the way he always appeared, without warning, without sound, with a specific quality of presence that made the air in a room do something different. He was wearing the charcoal overcoat again, his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Something more open than his usual careful containment. Something that he had perhaps stopped working to conceal. "We're closed," she said. And then, because she couldn't help it, "Obviously you know that." "Obviously," he said. He came inside and let the door close behind him. He looked around the empty shop, at the stacked chairs, the dark espresso machine, the chalkboard signs she had arranged that morning, and then at her. "How are you sleeping?" "Better," she said. It was true. The nightmares had not stopped, but they had become less frequent, and she had begun to sleep past 5 for the first time in months. "How did you know I wasn't sleeping?" "You were exhausted every morning for the first 2 weeks I came in," he said. "Less so after I left the note." She thought about that. "Because I had a choice," she said slowly. "Having the option changed something." "Yes," he said. She finished wiping down the counter and set the cloth aside and looked at him across the space of the empty room. He had not come closer. He was maintaining a deliberate distance that she recognized as intentional, a careful awareness of her space, of her right to determine how much of it he occupied. "You could have sat down," she said. "I wasn't sure if you wanted me to." She pulled out a chair from one of the unstacked tables and sat down, and after a moment he crossed the room and sat across from her, the same position as the Italian cafe, the same quality of unhurried attention. The shop was very quiet around them. The street outside was doing its Friday evening things. "Tell me something about yourself," Emma said. He looked at her. "What do you want to know?" "Something true," she said. "Not your name, and not your reputation. Something true." He was quiet for a moment. "I haven't eaten a meal at a table with another person in 4 years," he said. "I eat alone, or I eat while I'm working. I don't remember the last time I sat down to a meal and the only thing happening was the meal." She looked at him. "That's lonely." "Yes," he said. He didn't flinch from it. "Is that why you started coming here?" she said. "No," he said. "I started coming here because I passed by on the 3rd of February and saw you through the window, and I thought you looked like someone who had forgotten they were allowed to take up space." He paused. "I came back because I couldn't stop thinking about it." Emma held that for a long moment. The shop light was warm and low, and the street outside was blue dark, and the distance between their chairs was small enough that she could see the details of his face clearly. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight imperfection at the bridge of his nose that suggested it had been broken at some point and reset imprecisely, the way his jaw held a tension that never quite released. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" She thought about it honestly. "Someone who wanted something," she said. "Everyone who's ever been kind to me wanted something. It took me a while to believe you didn't." "I want something," he said. She stilled. "I want you to stop being afraid," he said. "That's what I want." His eyes held hers. "The rest of it, whatever else this is, that's not something I'm going to take. If there's something between us, it moves at your pace, in your time, on your terms." Emma looked at him for a long, steady moment. "Nobody has ever said anything like that to me," she said quietly. "I know," he said, and the quiet anger was back in his eyes. Not at her, never at her, but at the fact of it. At the world that had made it extraordinary rather than ordinary for a man to tell a woman that she was allowed to set the pace. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. She did not know exactly why she did it. It was an impulse that bypassed thought entirely, something that came from a place deeper than strategy or caution. His hand was large and warm and very still beneath hers, and he did not move or speak, only looked at her with an expression that had broken open into something unguarded and real. "I'm not ready for anything," she said. "I want to be clear about that." "You're clear," he said. "But I don't want to keep pretending I don't feel—" She stopped. "I don't know what to call it. I've been calling it terrifying. But I think it's something else." "It can be both," he said. She almost smiled. "It can be both," she agreed. She pulled her hand back after a moment. He let it go without reaching for it, and she thought about that, about the specific, deliberate restraint of a man who could have held on and didn't, and felt something settle inside her. They sat in the empty coffee shop for another hour, talking about nothing in particular. Chicago in the spring, the way the lake looked at dawn, the specific quality of silence in a city neighborhood at midnight. He told her in pieces about growing up in a family where power was the primary language and love was a secondary dialect spoken rarely and without fluency. She told him about a version of herself that existed before Daniel, a version that laughed easily and took up space and had opinions about wine and took weekend trips to the Michigan shore. "She's still there," he said. "Some of her," Emma said. "All of her," he said, with a certainty she didn't fully share but found herself wanting to. When she finally left, pulling on her coat in the doorway with the spring night cool against her face, She paused and looked back at him. He was still at the table, watching her go. "Caleb," she said. "Yes." "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me, before I could see myself." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "You were always visible. You just had someone convincing you otherwise." She stepped out into the night with her hands in her pockets and her sleeves where she chose to put them, and she did not pull them down past her wrists. For the first time, she didn't need to. She thought she had been careful. She had changed her number. She had told Birchwood she needed the building entrance kept off the staff roster. She had taken different routes home on different days, a habit she'd developed not from paranoia, but from the simple, wary intelligence of a woman who understood that her situation required it. She had been careful. But Daniel Marsh was a man who had spent 2 years learning the precise architecture of her caution, and caution, however practiced, is only effective against what you can anticipate. She didn't anticipate him waiting outside Birchwood on a Wednesday evening. She came out the back, which she had started doing as a matter of course, and he was there, standing in the alley with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the pleasant expression on his face, the one for strangers, the one for when there was an audience, except there was no audience, and the expression was wrong in the way that it was always wrong when there was no one to perform it for. "There you are," he said. Emma stopped walking. She was 10 feet from him, and her body was doing everything it had trained itself to do. Temperature dropping, assessment running, the automatic inventory of distances and obstacles and escape routes that had become as natural to her as breathing. There was a dumpster to her left. The alley entrance was behind her. The back door of the coffee shop required a key she had in her pocket. "Daniel," she said. "You've been hard to find," he said, still pleasant, still controlled. "I moved," she said. "I know," he said. "I just haven't been able to figure out where." His eyes moved over her with the familiar proprietary attention. "Who helped you?" "No one," she said. "Emma," he said, just her name, just the emphasis, the conjugation of her name that had meant for 2 years that she was in trouble. And then something different happened. She was afraid. She would not pretend she wasn't afraid. But beneath the fear was something new, a hard, clear knowledge that she had not had before, the knowledge that this was not the only version of her story, that there was an apartment 3 miles from where she was standing with a door that locked from the inside and her name on the lease, that there was a man who had looked at her with anger at whoever had done this, not at her, that there was a number in her phone she could call, that she was not in fact alone. "I'm not coming back," she said. Her voice was steady. His expression shifted, just slightly, the pleasant surface cracking along a familiar fault line. "We should talk about this somewhere." "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said. He moved toward her, and Emma reached into her pocket and called Caleb. It rang once. "Emma?" His voice, immediately. "I'm in the back alley of Birchwood," she said. She kept her eyes on Daniel. "He's here." There was a silence of approximately 2 seconds. "Don't move," Caleb said. She stood her ground. Daniel had stopped moving when she picked up the phone. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Uncertainty, the specific discomfort of a man whose control over a situation has been interrupted by a variable he didn't anticipate. "Who is that?" he said. Emma said nothing. She kept the phone to her ear and her eyes on Daniel and her feet exactly where they were. She heard 60 seconds later the sound of a car in the alley. Then another. Then the particular unhurried sound of a door opening and closing. Caleb came around the corner of the alley with the same quality of silence he brought to every room he entered. He was wearing the overcoat. His hands were loose at his sides. He stopped at Emma's shoulder and looked at Daniel the way a man looks at something he has already categorized and dismissed, and the specificity of the look, its absolute absence of heat or threat or drama, its pure, efficient appraisal, was somehow more frightening than any of the alternatives. Daniel went very still. "Daniel Marsh," Caleb said. Not a question. An identification. Daniel looked between Emma and the man beside her. He was doing a rapid recalibration. She could see it in his face, the realization that the situation was not what he'd thought it was. "I don't know who you are," Daniel said. "Yes, you do," Caleb said. Simply. Quietly. A silence. "This isn't your business," Daniel said, but the pleasantness had left his voice entirely. "She's my business," Caleb said. He did not move. He did not raise his voice. There was no performance in it at all. "And I want you to be clear about what that means going forward." Daniel looked at Emma with the expression she recognized as the last line of his usual script, the one that was supposed to make her feel guilty, supposed to make her second guess, supposed to pull her back by the particular thread of misplaced responsibility she had spent 2 years tangled in. She looked back at him and felt nothing but the cold, clear air of the March night. "Leave," she said. "Don't come back." Daniel looked between them for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the alley. Emma stood very still until the sound of his footsteps disappeared. Then she let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like a very long time. Caleb was still beside her. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't moved to stand in front of her, or between her and Daniel. He had stood at her shoulder, exactly at her shoulder, and let her say the words herself. She understood that he had done that on purpose. "You okay?" he said. "Yes," she said. And then, after a moment, "Yes, I am." She turned to look at him. The alley light was cold and white and cast hard shadows, and he was looking at her with that unguarded expression she had started to recognize, the one that appeared sometimes in unguarded moments, and made him look, briefly, like something other than a man built for danger. "You stood your ground," he said. "I had backup," she said. "You had yourself," he said. "I was just there." Emma looked at him in the cold white light of the alley and felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been cracked since the first morning and was now, slowly, beginning to reform into a different shape. Not fixed, not whole, but moving in a direction. She reached out and took his hand. He looked down at their joined hands and then up at her face. "I told you I wasn't ready for anything," she said. "You did," he said. "I think," she said slowly, "that I might be becoming ready for something." His hand was warm and still and large around hers, and he did not say anything immediately, but the expression on his face in the cold light of the alley was the most honest thing she had seen in a very long time. "Okay," he said finally, quietly, with a certainty that was not a demand, but a door opening. Emma looked at their hands, looked at him, looked at the entrance to the alley where Daniel had disappeared, and at the back door of the coffee shop where she had worked every morning for a year, pulling her sleeves down, and at the night sky above the buildings. "Okay," she said, and meant it entirely. Spring came to Chicago the way it always did, not gently, but in argument with winter, warm days interrupted by cold fronts, the lake still iron gray while the trees along the lakefront path began their tentative greening. Emma noticed it in a way she hadn't noticed seasons in a long time. The light changing, the smell of the air shifting, because she had, gradually and then suddenly, begun to notice things again. It happened the way recovery happens, which is to say imperfectly and non-linearly, and not at all the way it looks in stories. There were good days and there were difficult days, and there were days when she would be in the middle of something completely ordinary, rinsing a cup, walking to the train, arranging the chalkboard signs at Birchwood, and the weight of the last 2 years would land on her without warning, dense and specific, and demanding to be felt. On those days she didn't perform fine. She sat with it, or she walked with it, or she called Caleb and said, "I'm having a hard day." And he said, "I know," and they talked about nothing important for an hour, and she felt incrementally less alone. She was learning what it meant to receive care without performing gratitude for it. She was learning that asking for help was not the same as admitting weakness. She was learning, slowly and with considerable effort, to stop waiting for things to go wrong. These were not small lessons. They were the kind that required daily practice and had no graduation. Her relationship with Caleb was not easily categorized, and she had stopped trying. What it was, honest, careful, and unlike anything she had experienced before. He texted her in the mornings, not to check on her in the way that felt like monitoring, but because he had started sending her things he thought she would find interesting. A photograph of the lake at 5 a.m., and the sky going orange above the water. An article about a small bookshop that had been operating in Wicker Park for 40 years. A single sentence occasionally that was not a question and not a statement, but something in between. She was beginning to understand, a man who communicated better in small and deliberate gestures than in sustained and conventional ones. She reciprocated in kind. She left coffee for him at the counter before he arrived. She had memorized the exact cup and the exact temperature, and said nothing about it, and he said nothing about it, and it became simply a thing that happened. She started texting him things back. The way the espresso machine sounded when it was calibrated correctly, the color of the sky over the river on cloudy mornings, a line from a book she was rereading that had made her stop. He read everything she sent him. She knew this without being told. What it was not, simple. It was not uncomplicated or without friction. There were conversations that were difficult, about his world, about the specific and serious nature of what he did and who he was, and what it meant in practical terms. She did not pretend his life was neutral. She did not construct a version of him that was safe or domesticated or divorced from the reality of the Santoro name and what it represented. "I need you to be honest with me about what this is," she said to him one evening, 3 weeks after the alley. They were at his apartment. The first time she had been there, a high floor of a glass building near the river, spare and quiet in a way that surprised her. Your world. What it actually is. He looked at her without deflecting. "Dangerous," he said. "To me and to anyone close to me." "Has anyone been hurt?" she said. "Because of who you are. Someone close to you." A pause. "Yes," he said. "Tell me," she said. He told her. Not everything. There were things she understood he would never tell anyone. But enough. Enough for her to understand that his life had not been without its own particular losses, its own particular costs. He had a younger brother who had left the family in the country 7 years ago and had not spoken to him since. A woman he had been close to, in his mid-20s, who had made the decision that proximity to him was not compatible with the life she wanted. He spoke about both of these things without self-pity and without excuse, which she found more affecting than either would have been. "Do you think she was wrong?" Emma said, the woman who left. He considered it with the seriousness he gave everything. "No," he said. "She knew what she needed. I couldn't give it to her. That's not a condemnation of either of us." Emma sat with that. "That's a very mature way to look at it," she said. "I've had 7 years to arrive there," he said. "What do you want now?" she said. "What does someone like you want from a life like yours?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "To stop eating alone." It was such a simple thing, such an unexpectedly simple human thing, delivered without self-consciousness or calculation, and Emma felt it land somewhere central and press there with a gentle, insistent weight. "That's all?" she said. "That's a great deal, actually," he said. She thought about it. "Yes," she said. "I suppose it is." She stayed for dinner. They ate at the table by the window with the river lights below them, and it was not dramatic, and it was not cinematic, and it was one of the best evenings she had spent in years. The complication arrived, as complications tend to, from a direction she hadn't been watching. His name was Marcus Vega, and he was, according to the careful and limited explanation Caleb gave her, a man with whom the Santoro family had a long and unresolved history. Emma did not press for details. What she understood from context and observation, she had become, out of necessity, quite good at reading what was happening in a room from the behavior of the people in it, was that Marcus Vega had decided that Emma represented something useful. She found out because one of Caleb's people, a quiet, efficient woman named Rosa, who had been assigned to accompany Emma during a period that Caleb described only as elevated, brought her a message. Not verbally. A note, passed through an intermediary, from someone who described themselves as a mutual acquaintance and made it clear, in the oblique and careful language of people who communicate in implications, that her continued presence in Caleb Santoro's orbit was being noticed and would have consequences. Emma read the note twice. Then she called Caleb. "Someone sent me a note," she said when he picked up. A silence that was a fraction of a second longer than his usual ones. "Where are you?" "Home," she said. "Rose is here. I'm fine." She paused. "The note implies that I'm in a vulnerable position because of our association. That someone might decide to use me as..." She searched for the word. "As a point of pressure." Another silence. When he spoke, his voice was very controlled. "I'm coming over." "Caleb," she said, "I'm not calling you because I'm panicking. I'm calling you because we said we'd be honest with each other, and I need you to tell me what's actually happening." She heard him exhale. "Yes," he said. "You do." He told her over the phone, in brief and careful terms, what was happening and why. There was a power dispute. There was always a power dispute, and Marcus Vega had identified her as a variable that could be used to complicate Caleb's position. It was a recognizable move in the world Caleb inhabited. It was a move that relied on the assumption that Emma was passive, that she could be frightened. "Can you handle Vega?" she said. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "Then handle him," she said. "But I want to know when it's resolved. I'm not going to sit in the dark on this." "You won't," he said. "And Caleb," she said. "Yes." "I'm not a liability," she said. "I'm not someone who needs to be kept in a box. If being with you means there are risks, I'd rather face them with accurate information than be managed." A pause. "You're remarkable," he said. "I'm practical," she said. "There's a difference." She heard something in his voice that she had come to recognize as the closest he got to amusement. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. "I'll make coffee," she said. He arrived in 18. The Vega situation resolved in a way that Caleb never fully detailed, and Emma never fully asked about. What she knew was that within 10 days, it was over, and that the specific, watchful quality of Rosa's presence gradually relaxed, and that Caleb came to dinner 2 Fridays later with the particular quality of settled attention that she had learned to read as the absence of an active problem. "It's done," he said simply. "Good," she said, equally simply. They ate. She had made pasta, a recipe she'd found in a cookbook her mother had given her years ago, before the distance between them had grown into something that felt permanent. And he ate with the focused appreciation of a man for whom a home-cooked meal was genuinely unfamiliar. And she watched him and thought about what he had said in the early days. To stop eating alone. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Are you happy?" she said. "Not right now, specifically. In general." "Are you happy with your life?" He considered it. He always considered things honestly, which she had come to depend on, and which still, occasionally, surprised her. "No," he said. "Not for a long time. I was occupied, which is different. You can be very occupied and very successful and very respected and be completely missing the actual substance of a life." "What changed?" she said. "You know what changed," he said. She looked at him across the table. "A coffee shop," she said. "A woman in a coffee shop pulling her sleeves down," he said, "who looked like she had forgotten she was allowed to want things." Emma set down her fork. "I hadn't forgotten," she said slowly. "I think I had decided that wanting things led to bad outcomes, that it was safer to want less." "Is it still?" he said. She thought about her apartment, which had her name on the door, and her books on the shelves, and the coffee ring she had not cleaned off the table, because it was hers, and she could leave it there if she wanted. She thought about the last 12 weeks, the fear and the grief, and the slow, difficult work of reassembling herself into a shape she actually recognized. She thought about what it felt like to walk into a room and know that no one in it was measuring her temperature, and calculating her next move based on the reading. "No," she said. "It's not safer. It's just smaller." He looked at her with that open, unguarded expression. "What do you want?" he said. "Not from me. Just, what do you want?" She thought about it carefully, because he deserved a careful answer, and because it was, she realized, a question she had not allowed herself in a very long time. "I want to stop hiding," she said. "I want to have a life that I chose, rather than a life that happened to me. I want to know what I'm capable of when I'm not spending all my energy on survival." She paused. I want the version of myself that existed before I let someone convince me she wasn't worth keeping." "She's still here," he said, exactly as he had said it before. "I'm beginning to believe that," she said. He reached across the table. He didn't take her hand. He simply placed his beside hers, an offering rather than a claim, and waited. She turned her hand over and took his. "I don't know what we are," she said. "We're something," he said. "That's enough for now." "Is it enough for you?" she said. "Honestly." He looked at their hands on the table, then at her. "You being here," he said, "is more than I thought I was allowed to have." Emma felt that land somewhere deep and stay there. "You're allowed," she said quietly. It was a Saturday in late April, when she wore short sleeves for the first time. It was not a dramatic decision. It was not a moment she had planned or anticipated. She was getting dressed on a warm morning, genuinely warm, the first real warmth of the year, the kind of morning that was an argument for keeping your windows open. And she reached for her usual long-sleeved shirt, and then paused. The bruises were gone. They had been gone for weeks. The skin of her forearm was simply her skin, unchanged, unmarked by anything recent, bearing only the history that everyone carries invisibly on their bodies, whether they can see it or not. She looked at her arm for a long moment. Then she put on a short-sleeved shirt, made coffee, and went to meet Caleb. He was waiting at the small park near the lakefront that had become, over the course of the spring, a place they went on Saturday mornings when neither of them had commitments. He was on the bench they had unofficially claimed, looking out at the lake with his habitual quality of patient attention, and he turned when he heard her approaching. His eyes went to her arms. Not the way he had looked in the coffee shop, in those early weeks. Not with the careful, cataloging attention of someone assessing damage. He looked at her arms the way you look at something that represents a change you have been quietly, steadfastly hoping for. He didn't say anything about it. She sat down beside him. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. They sat together in the April warmth with the lake doing its particular late spring things, enormous and shifting and indifferent and beautiful, and the city doing its Saturday things around them, and Emma felt something she had been working toward for months settle into place with a quiet, definitive solidity. Not perfect, not without complication, not a resolution that tied everything off neatly, because nothing in a real life ever does. But solid, grounded, real in a way that asked nothing from her except that she show up for it as herself, fully and without concealment. "I've been thinking," she said. "About?" he said. "About what I want to do," she said. "Long term. I don't want to work in a coffee shop forever. I was in school before Daniel. I was studying social work. I never finished." She paused. "I think I want to finish." He was quiet for a moment. "What would you do with it?" "Work with women in the situations I was in," she said. "I know what it looks like from the inside. I know what it feels like when someone sees it and doesn't say anything. And I know what it feels like when someone finally does." She looked at the lake. "I want to be the person who says something." "Then do it," he said, simply, as if there were no question. "It'll take time," she said. "Money. I'll have to figure out the logistics." "Emma," he said. She stopped. He was looking at her with that steady, dark attention. "Do it. The rest can be figured out." She looked at him. "You can't just tell me to do things and expect them to happen." "That's not what I'm doing," he said. "I'm telling you that the reasons you think you can't are not real obstacles. They're echoes, old ones." He paused. "You've been listening to someone else's voice about what you're capable of for too long." She sat with that for a moment. The lake light moved. "I know," she said. "So do I," he said. "I've been watching you decide not to trust that voice for weeks, and every time you don't, you become more yourself." Emma looked at him. This man who was, by any conventional measure, not a simple or a safe choice, who had a name that preceded him into every room, and a world that existed in the shadow of ordinary life, who had sat at a corner table in a coffee shop for 8 weeks, watching a woman pull down her sleeves, and who had done something about it in the most careful and deliberate way he knew how, who had never asked her to be grateful for safety, who had never turned his protection into a currency she owed him, who had, in his own complicated and imperfect way, simply decided that she deserved someone paying attention. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I know," he said. "I mean," she paused. "I mean that I'm not afraid of this, of whatever we are. I've been using the fact that it's complicated as a reason to keep a distance I don't actually want to keep." He was very still. "I'm not doing that anymore," she said. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not desperate or dramatic, or the culmination of months of withheld fever. It was deliberate and soft, and entirely her choice, and he received it the way he received everything she gave him, without reaching for more than she offered, with a warmth that had been waiting quietly, and without impatience. When she pulled back, he was looking at her with an expression she had no vocabulary for yet. "Emma?" he said. "I know," she said. "That's all," he said. "Just your name." And the way he said it, not with emphasis or urgency, but with the simple, specific weight of someone saying the name of something they have been careful with and intend to keep being careful with, was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. She leaned her head against his shoulder. The lake went on doing its lake things. The city went on. The morning went on. And Emma Richardson sat in the April sunshine with her bare arms in the light and her head against the shoulder of a man who had seen her before she could see herself. And she thought about what it had taken to get here. Not what had been done to her. She was not, she had decided, going to organize her life around what had been done to her, but what she had done. The phone call, the note, the morning she had said yes without hesitation, the alley, the dinner, the pasta, all the small and significant moments in which she had chosen herself. She had not been rescued. That was the thing she wanted to be clear about. to herself, and to anyone who might construct a simpler story. She had been seen. There was a difference. Being seen had given her the traction she needed to do the actual work herself, and the actual work had been hers entirely. The courage to reach for the card, to call the number, to say I'm not coming back and mean it, to stand in the alley and hold her ground, to sit at a table in a kitchen and ask for honesty, to lean in and close a distance she no longer had a reason to maintain. She thought about what it had felt like to pull her sleeves down every morning, the ritual of it, the way it had become so habitual she'd forgotten it was a choice. She thought about all the other things she had made habitual that were also choices, the smallness, the contraction, the careful management of how much of herself was visible at any given moment. She was done with the habit. She was not done with the fear entirely. She suspected she would not be for a long time, and she had made a kind of peace with that. The understanding that healing was not the elimination of fear, but the gradual accumulation of evidence that you were stronger than it. But she was done letting it set the size of her life. I enrolled, she said. Caleb lifted his head slightly. In school? I called the admissions office on Thursday, she said. I can re-enroll in the fall if I submit my transcript and a personal statement. She paused. I wrote the personal statement this morning, before I came here. He was quiet for a moment. What did you say? I said that I spent 2 years making myself invisible, she said, and that I'm spending this year learning how to be seen again, and that I want to use what I know to make sure other women don't have to do it alone. He was quiet for longer this time. When she looked up at him, his jaw was doing the thing she recognized as the controlled anger, but it had shifted, and what it was doing now was something else. Something she thought might be the closest he came to being moved. That's a good statement, he said finally. I thought so, she said. He put his arm around her, and she let herself settle into the specific warmth of it, without calculating whether she was allowed to, without measuring the distance between where she was and where she should be, without any of the careful, contracted management she had practiced for 2 years. She simply stayed. Summer came in full by late June, and with it the particular density of Chicago in warm weather. The lakefront crowded, the neighborhoods loud, the city insisting on itself with the energy of a place that had survived a long winter and intended to celebrate. Emma worked her last shift at Birchwood on a Friday, and Diane gave her a card signed by everyone on staff and cried slightly, which Emma had not expected, and which meant more to her than she found she could say. She had given notice 3 weeks prior. She was starting a position at a nonprofit in September. She had found it the same way she found most things now, by looking and asking, and not assuming that wanting something meant she couldn't have it. And the months between had been dedicated to the personal statement, the re-enrollment, the slow and ongoing work of building a life that had architecture rather than just walls. Caleb was waiting outside when she finished her last shift. He was leaning against the car with his hands in his pockets, and when she came through the door he looked up and his face did the thing it did. The opening, the unguarded expression. And she walked toward him without slowing. Last day, she said. Last day, he confirmed. How does it feel? He said. She thought about it. Like something ending so that something else can start, she said, which is different from just something ending. Yes, he said. It is. She stopped in front of him. The evening was warm, and the street was doing its Friday things, and the city was all around them, enormous and indifferent, and full of its own 10,000 stories. And in the middle of it, she was here, in her short sleeves, in her skin, visible. I want to tell you something, she said. Tell me, he said. I know what I feel, she said. I've been careful about naming it, because I was afraid that naming things made them fragile, but I'm done being careful about that. She looked at him. I love you. I don't expect anything in return, and I'm not saying it as a transaction. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I've spent 2 years not saying true things, and I'm not doing that anymore." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. His expression was the open, unguarded one, and he did not rush to speak. But when he did, his voice was quiet and completely certain. "I love you," he said. "I have been trying to find the right way to say it for 2 months. I kept deciding it was too soon, and then deciding that too soon was not a category that applied to what I felt." He paused. "You are the most honest thing that has happened to me in a very long time." Emma felt something inside her chest do a slow and deliberate thing. Not a surge, not an explosion, but a deepening. The particular kind of emotion that comes not from being overwhelmed, but from being confirmed in something you had quietly, carefully believed. She took his hand. "Dinner?" she said. "At a table," he said. "At a table," she agreed. They walked to the car together in the June evening, and she did not think about the sleeves, because there were no sleeves to think about, because she was not hiding anything, because there was nothing left to hide. She was Emma Richardson, 27 years old, walking in the summer light toward a life she had chosen on purpose, with the evidence of her survival on her skin and the knowledge of her own strength in her chest. She had been seen before she could see herself, and then she had learned to see herself. And the difference between those two things, the seeing and the being seen, the receiving and the choosing, was the whole of it. That was the whole story. Not the man, however complicated and careful and honest he had turned out to be. Not the rescue she had not received. Not the danger she had walked toward and found, improbably, to be safer than what she was walking away from. The whole story was this. She had decided that she was worth the effort of her own survival. And then she had survived. And then she had done more than that. She had come back, in full, into the light, with nothing covered. And she had stayed. Emma didn't need someone to fight her battles. She needed someone to stand beside her while she fought them herself. And that changed everything. This story wasn't only about dangerous love or forbidden attraction. It was about the moment a woman decides that she is worth the effort of her own survival, and what becomes possible once she believes it. I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly. Have you ever confused being seen with being saved? Have you ever waited for someone else to give you permission to choose yourself when the permission was yours all along? Tell me in the comments what this story taught you. About love, about courage, about the difference between being rescued and being found. Your answer might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.